Welcome everyone to an In Conversation with Dr. Catherine Talbot. My name is Emma Smith. I am the project manager with Empowered Conversations, which is a project of Age UK Salford. Catherine, thank you so much for giving your time today.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so the pleasure is all ours. So Catherine is a senior lecturer in psychology at Bournemouth University. If you haven't been to one of these webinars before, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Empowered Conversations. I'm going to hand over to Catherine for the presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you see at the bottom, you've found the chat already, but if you look at next to the chat, there's a Q&A. So if you've got any questions for Catherine, please drop them in there and we'll make sure that we pick them up towards the end of this session. So Empowered Conversations empowers families to live as well as they can by keeping channels of communication and connection open. And we do that by delivering communication courses across Greater Manchester. So we have Empowered Conversations and Moving Beyond Words. We also offer dementia-focused therapeutic support for family caregivers through Empowered Carers. We have several online groups supporting caregivers, and we do these webinars every so often. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to find out more about Catherine's work, and I'm going to hand over to her now and put myself on mute.
Fabulous. Hi, everyone. So I am just going to share my screen, so bear with me while I do that, and hopefully it all works fine. Okay. So you should be able to see that. I'm just going to move that over.
You can.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'll make a start. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today and share some of the exciting research I've been conducted. Thank you for the introduction, Emma. So as Emma said, my name's Catherine and I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at Bournemouth University. I'm also one of the deputy leads of our Ageing and Dementia Research Centre that we have here. My area of psychology is cyberpsychology, which you may or may not have heard of. But basically, that means I'm all interested in how people interact with digital technologies and also how digital technologies shape society. And my research at the moment specifically focuses on how digital technologies can be harnessed to empower people with dementia and to support their well-being, their identity, and their social inclusion. And what I'm going to be focusing on today is specifically my work on social media. I am on Twitter if you want to give me a follow at Catherine Talbot. And if you have any questions after the session or you're interested in this research, feel free to ping me an email at ctalbot@bournemouth.ac.uk. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a bit of background, but I'm sure quite a few of you are aware of this. So dementia is a significant global health concern. The latest data from the Dementia Forecasting Collaborators indicates that there are more than 55 million people worldwide living with dementia. And their projections suggest that this number could soar to over 150 million by 2050. And while many people with dementia do continue to find meaning and positivity in life, despite the diagnosis, we know it does have a powerful impact on those who are affected. So, for example, people with dementia, they report heightened feelings of depression, of frustration, of shame and loneliness as well. They also report changes in their sense of agency and their sense of identity following diagnosis. So we know from interviews with people with dementia, they report that their social roles change. They may have to stop working, for example. Their family might start to see and treat them in a different way. And this can come with a reduced sense of self-worth and also a loss of purpose too. They might also stop engaging in activities that were once meaningful to them for various reasons. And this again can exacerbate these feelings of isolation and of loneliness. And all of this, as I'm sure you're all aware, is compounded by the stigma and the stereotypes that are associated with dementia, where a person really can internalize these stereotypes and start to view themselves and their own abilities differently. And also others might see them differently as well because of this label. And it's not just people with dementia who are affected themselves, it's carers as well. So compared to the general population, we know that carers experience higher levels of physical and mental illness. They experience high levels of social isolation, as well as financial distress. And so in response to all of these challenges, dementia has been identified as a key health and social care, a key priority in health and social care planning worldwide. So what this means is that there's really this pressing need to identify cost-effective and far-reaching means of supporting those who are affected by dementia to live with and to adjust to the diagnosis. And this is where digital technologies come in. So they might provide some solutions. So remember, I'm really emphasizing that word there, some solutions. They're by no means a one-size-fits-all solution. But they might provide some solutions by enabling social interaction, by providing cognitive stimulation, by providing activities for enjoyment, providing a way to access peer support, and also engage in activities for self-development. So where does social media come into this? Well, in recent years, we've really started to recognise the value of online communities and online spaces. And this has been amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic, right? This time really highlighted the importance of virtual connections and the important role that digital spaces play when maintaining our social connections and in combating social isolation. And for people with a wide range of health conditions, research has shown that social media, it's a really valuable resource, can provide access to information, access to support networks and communities, and it can also provide avenues to have your voice heard. So to have a say in the issues that affect you. So really this tool for advocacy. However, while the benefits and challenges of social media for people with other health conditions has been explored and is quite well documented, research into its potential for people with dementia is very much still in its infancy. And this might be due to a few reasons, but it might be due to stereotypical assumptions about the abilities of people with dementia and their technological literacy and their interests in spaces such as social media. Nevertheless, this is a really quite unique, developing and exciting area. And it's important that we understand the specific needs and challenges faced by those with dementia so that we can harness the power of social media to create supportive online communities that preserve the identities of people with dementia and improve their well-being and really create these supportive and secure online experiences. So it's all of this that led me to my research questions of what I'm going to be covering today, where I wanted to investigate the lived experiences of people with dementia who engage with social media. And this includes the perceived benefits of social media, as well as the challenges. And more recently, I've been interested in looking at unpaid carers' attitudes towards people with dementia using social media and any experiences of supporting usage, so that we can identify some ways that we can perhaps support usage or we can design social media platforms to be more inclusive. So let's have a little look. I'm going to talk you through a couple of studies that I've conducted. This was kind of the very first one which has led me down this road really from my PhD. And my PhD specifically focused on Twitter, which at the time seemed like a great idea, but now I kind of wish I'd broadened it out, and especially with everything that's going on with Twitter at the moment. But anyway, this involved interviews with 11 people with young onset dementia who use Twitter. Now, I just wanted to find out, why are you using it? How are you using it? And what are the benefits and challenges associated with this? And this was before COVID as well. So this was at a time when I could go traveling all around the country and go to speak to people directly. And I will say that through speaking with people, I truly learned about dementia and really valued their stories. So participants, what they spoke about was this process of using Twitter to re-establish their sense of identity after diagnosis. So they would often talk about this time after receiving a diagnosis being a really difficult time, speak about it being a black hole where they felt left, they weren't sure who they were anymore. But they were able to go onto Twitter and to find a community of others with dementia who were living with dementia. And this provided a space where they could access peer support as well, so they could get the support that they needed. What we also found was that once they were established within these online communities on Twitter, many got this renewed sense of purpose, and they kind of became experts themselves. So they started to support others then, and that was really helpful for them. They also used the information on Twitter to educate themselves about dementia, so to really become the expert of their condition, but also to educate others as well about their lived experiences. And also we found that they could use Twitter to really have their voice heard, so engage in advocacy to raise awareness about dementia, about what it means to be a person with dementia. And all of this positively shaped their identity with dementia and how they felt about dementia. Also, what I thought was interesting, participants really appreciated the freedom and control that Twitter afforded them in terms of how they could communicate. It allowed them to express themselves at their own pace, where they weren't interrupted, as they often felt they were in offline conversations. And we also found that the character limit of tweets was really valuable here. So this was when tweets were 140 characters, by the way, so much, much short and snappy. And people really valued that because they felt that they could focus on what it was that they were trying to share. Whereas Facebook, for example, they felt there was too much space to expand on topics, and they get a bit lost, a bit confused, whereas this character limit was helpful. However, there were also some challenges of communicating in this way. Tweeting, it did take cognitive effort. It did take energy. Sometimes the pace of Twitter feeds was also hard to keep up with. But another way that participants used Twitter was they really wanted to redefine what it meant to be a person with dementia. So they'd go online and they'd challenge stereotypes and misconceptions about the diagnosis. And some people I spoke to said that even just by being on Twitter, they were already challenging those stereotypes by showing that they could use this social media platform and also use it really effectively as well. Not all experiences were positive though. Some people did encounter stigma online, which is perhaps not surprising given how prevalent stigma is in offline conversations. It's perhaps expected that it would also be there online. But one key issue was that some people I spoke to would get backlash from other Twitter users who publicly challenged and doubted their diagnosis due to them not presenting in this typical way. And this was really difficult for the people I spoke to. And we called these people online dementia doubters, because the participants, they would start to question their diagnosis and whether they should be tweeting and speaking honestly about it. Someone told me that it made them feel like a fraud, and that was actually a really difficult experience for them. So as I say, this was just an initial study, but it has kind of guided the rest of my work. And what I suggest from this was that Twitter could be an important source of post-diagnostic support for some people with dementia, but there are also risks, particularly for those who don't align with the stereotypes of dementia. So since then, I've started to look at social media a bit more broadly. And this is a project I have ongoing with a fantastic researcher, Dr. Melissa Brunner at the University of Sydney. And what we're doing is we're looking at the online identities of people with neurological conditions. So I'm leading the dementia phase of the study, and she's leading a separate phase. But basically in this study, we use something called photo elicitation with a group of 10 people with dementia. And what I mean by photo elicitation in this context is that participants were invited to share screenshots of posts from their social media accounts with us that they felt really showcased their experiences, their values, and their identity. What we did then was we conducted interviews with these participants to explore their social media usage and really reflect upon those screenshots that they'd sent us. And this paper is currently under review, so fingers crossed on that one. So let's have a look at what we found. Well, the first theme is all about disclosing a dementia diagnosis within online spaces. And this was a decision that they required careful consideration for the people we spoke to. And it was very often influenced by stigma surrounding dementia and concerns about how others might perceive them after they've disclosed this diagnosis. So, for example, one person who I've quoted there, they described initially refraining from discussing their diagnosis when they were online because they wanted to avoid being pigeonholed and to resist some of the stereotypes that were commonly associated with dementia. However, this decision to discuss a diagnosis and to be open about a diagnosis, it depended on context. So what we found was designated Facebook groups for people with dementia and online forums tailored specifically towards people with dementia. They were more, they facilitated greater disclosure. So what these spaces did was they provided a space where there was a sense of belonging. There was mutual understanding amongst the users of these spaces. Everyone kind of spoke a shared language of dementia, and it was seen as this really safe environment where people could support one another. Contrast to that, yeah.
Catherine, I'm so sorry. The slides don't seem to be moving on. It might just be my machine, but I wonder, can you stop sharing and then reshare again, just see if it'll nudge it over? I was that busy writing everything down that you were telling me. I didn't notice.
Oh, really? Oh, that's such a shame.
If you go, no, okay, yeah, they're not moving on. So we are like, I mean, we're just listening to you anyway, but I don't know what's on the slide. So if you stop share, so if you go to the top and just stop share.
Yeah, sorry. Bear with. Stop
Richard
share.
was the same as me. He was writing it all down, so he didn't notice either. And then if you share again, and I should just say, Matt gave us a quick wave before we started. Matt from Stoke, and he said,
Hi, Matt.
for me.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, they've moved on now.
Are they still moving on?
Well, it's moved on to the quotes. Yes. Yeah, it's moving on now.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that, everyone.
No, I should have looked up and spotted it. So apologies.
That's fine. So yeah, in contrast with this, right? So other people with dementia did actively choose to disclose their identity in public social media spaces like Twitter and like blogs as well. And what these people were motivated by was this really strong desire to educate others about the realities of dementia and to challenge all of these misconceptions. So by sharing their experiences openly, they wanted to create a much more nuanced and much more empathetic understanding of dementia among a much broader audience. In addition to this kind of broader societal impact as well, what we found was that discussing a dementia diagnosis had really personal benefits for the person as well. So writing about their experiences, particularly through things such as blogging, it provided this really kind of therapeutic outlet. So it helped participants to gain a better understanding of their situations by stepping back and reflecting on it. And it also helped them to come to terms with things that had happened. So it seemed to offer this pathway almost towards acceptance and resilience. So I have just moved on my slide. Hopefully that's moved on. Fabulous. Okay, so the second bit is all about this kind of sense of continuity, really. So participants spoke about using social media as a way to keep connected to who they were before their diagnosis and experience this continuity. So social media offered a sense of stability, really, amid the uncertainty posed by dementia. And when participants were talking about this sense of continuity, what they tended to talk about their working identities. So what they would do was they would use the skills and the expertise that were acquired during their careers, and they would use those skills to find ways to contribute meaningfully to online conversations about dementia. So just one example, someone I spoke to was a former journalist. And what they did was they used their experiences of being able to find information and being able to tell stories to educate others about dementia and demystify quite complex processes. And by sharing this knowledge and this guidance, it not only helped others, but it also gave them a sense of purpose and a sense of fulfillment from these contributions. Also, a few people told me that social media provided a way of preserving memories as well. So some would use Facebook as kind of a memory repository via the memories function, where they could store their experiences, and they could capture what had happened, and then use this for reminiscence in the future. And also we heard stories of them using these with friends and families as well to stimulate discussions and overcome some of the challenges associated with memory. And this is really important here. So importantly, social media, it allowed participants to explore aspects of themselves that went beyond their dementia diagnosis. So as we said there, I'm more than my diagnosis. Participants told us that in offline interactions, they often felt reduced to their diagnosis, so people would see the dementia and not see them. In contrast, they could go onto social media, and this provided a space where they could communicate freely and explore other aspects of themselves without these constraints. So what I argue is this facilitates this kind of more multifaceted sense of identity, where people can explore lots of their different interests and not feel like they're just being viewed as a person with dementia. Instead, they're being viewed as complete people. So this is just one example from a person with young onset dementia who described using Twitter to engage with a wide range of interests. So he says, I feel very old when I tell people that I have dementia. And to post things like the UFC or different things, it makes me feel like I'm in my age group again. So what we can see here is that using social media in this way enabled him to reject some of the stereotypes associated with old age. They could feel more part of their age group, and they could resist being just exclusively defined by their diagnosis. And actually, this was the case for many people we spoke to. Social media provided a way to keep connected with specific hobbies and interests, and these all offered a respite from dementia. So what this highlights is the empowering potential of social media in enabling people with dementia to assert aspects of their identity and actively engage in interests that bring joy, that bring purpose, and that bring a sense of fulfillment. And then just finally for this little bit before moving on, what we were also interested in is the distinct features of social media that are being helpful here. And we identified 3 key features. So these were self-expression, visibility, and association. So here's self-expression on social media platforms. It allowed people with dementia to overcome offline communication challenges by providing them a way of communicating in a textual format, which some people preferred, rather than speech. Participants also appreciated the different ways you can communicate on social media. So it wasn't just text, but also images, emojis, videos. These offered different ways that the people we spoke to could convey their thoughts, their emotions, and their experiences. And this ultimately amplified their capacity to communicate aspects of themselves and to communicate with others. Secondly, there was visibility, and this was particularly prominent on platforms like Twitter. So it provided people with dementia a platform where they could really shout about their experiences to the world and really have their voices heard and raise awareness among a broader audience. Lastly, a key feature was association, and this was highly valued by participants. So social media platforms facilitated social connections beyond their direct offline networks. Many people I've spoken to have said how their world can potentially become quite small after a diagnosis, but social media seemed to provide a way of counteracting that effect and connecting with people in some cases all over the world. And this was valuable because it provided some important support systems where they could connect with others, share hints and tips, and access peer support. More recently, I've done some work with Professor Neil Coulson, who's a professor of health psychology at the University of Nottingham. And what we've done is we've worked together to look at the Alzheimer's Society online support forum for people affected by dementia, which they very kindly gave us access to. And what we're interested in this study is, how is this platform being used as a starting point? For those of you that don't know, the forum is pretty well used. At the time we wrote the paper, it had over 77,000 members and over 126,000 threads. And what we did in this study was we went onto a specific forum called I Have Dementia, and we then randomly selected 100 conversations from there. And what we got from that was 850 individual messages posted by 250 unique usernames. And we then went on to analyse that. And we have published the findings of the thematic analysis. There's one that's still under review at the moment. But yeah, these themes basically speak to the value of the online forum for people living with dementia. So first of all, we identified this pattern of journeying through dementia. So what we found was users turned to the forum to share their really personal experiences throughout their journey. And this included various points. So before reaching a diagnosis and having concerns, they'd go on at the point of diagnosis and the immediate aftermath of that. There'd be people going on and discussing their experiences of living with dementia and what that looked like and what that meant. There were also discussions of looking to the future as well and the uncertainties associated with that. So what they did was they shared the challenges and the difficult emotions they were experiencing, as well as their ability to continue living a full life with reasonable adjustments. But one thing we did notice is that people with a range of dementia diagnoses and symptoms use the online forum, and that included those with rarer forms of dementia. And this is particularly important given that we know that services are typically tailored towards those with more common types of dementia. So this seems to be filling an important gap here. And what sharing personal stories of dementia did was it elicited a range of emotional support from other people, and this served to benefit users in times of need. So others would provide advice and information based on their own personal experiences, or they'd also refer others to other sources of information. And what was nice to see actually was that it wasn't uncommon to see people coming back to the forum to make a post after acknowledging just how valued the support was to them and actually how valuable the online forum was to them as well in general. So what we saw was it really was this community of people who were all bound together through their shared experiences of dementia with others who truly understood. And one late breaking finding as well is that we noticed nearly all of the first posts, so when people would first go on, received a reply, and most of these were on the same day. So this is a really useful resource in that regard. If someone is in need and needs emotional support, this could be a really important avenue for that. Well, what does this mean? Well, our findings really highlight the value of social media, such as Twitter, Facebook groups, online forums, in shaping the identities of people with dementia by facilitating self-expression, by giving them visibility and connections to others with the diagnosis. And I've been trying to think about how this can be used, but it seems that writing appears to be a very quite therapeutic outlet for people. So future research might wish to think about social media as a way of encouraging people to tell their stories and how they're navigating life through dementia, particularly through blogs, for example. I also think that exposure to these stories for people who've recently been diagnosed could be really helpful and instill a sense of hope and encouragement to those who've been recently diagnosed by showing that it is possible to live a full life despite the diagnosis. And also because of the benefits in terms of community and peer support, what I suggest is that clinicians may wish to point people with dementia towards these online spaces to facilitate a sense of empowerment and social support. And this is only going to become a bigger thing, right? As social media usage among people with dementia continues to rise, healthcare professionals, policymakers, technology developers, and carers need to proactively prepare for this trend. So on that note, what about unpaid carers? Well, this is some recent work that I've been doing, and it's part of a wider study about attitudes towards social media usage among unpaid carers and people with dementia. And what we did in this study was we recruited 234 unpaid carers to take part in an online survey. And this survey asks them questions about whether the person they care for uses social media, if and how they support the person to use social media, any concerns they have, and also what are their training and their resource needs as well. Interestingly, we found that of the 234 people who completed our survey, 23.4% cared for someone who uses social media. And I was actually quite shocked by that figure, as it was more than I expected it to be. And of those, they reported that Facebook was the most commonly used platform. When we asked them about training and resources, most people told us that they didn't know where to access any training on how to use social media safely and effectively, but expressed that they would like to access this. This is something that they would like. And that's something that I'm going to focus on in future. So when we were looking at the qualitative data, we identified these 4 patterns, which I'll go into a bit more detail in a moment. But essentially, unpaid carers told us that they really valued the cognitive stimulation and the social functions of social media in supporting the well-being of people with dementia. But they were also mindful of their vulnerability when they're online to scammers, for example. So what they did was they carefully managed how people with dementia engaged with social media to create experiences online that were supportive, but also secure. So I've put a balance there, but it was very much striking this balance between the perceived social benefits with online safety and security, dignity and independence, and also the demands of care. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So carers helped people with dementia with a range of social media activities, and they really acted as social media navigators here. And this included things like setting up profiles, showing them how to create and view posts, connecting with friends, locating and following content that's of interest, showing them how to navigate some quite complex interfaces, and also purchasing items through Facebook Marketplace as well. And their role as a navigator here, it wasn't just a one-time occurrence, right? It was this process of ongoing technical support. And the carers primarily attributed this to memory difficulties, as some people would forget how to do certain tasks, so how to post content or how to navigate platforms. So they'd be on hand to help with this. And one common problem was forgetting passwords. So carers told us they did spend considerable time unlocking accounts and resetting passwords. And there was only one person who used a password manager to simplify this process. And one key issue as well was when platforms were updated. So the carers said that the person they cared for would struggle to adapt to these platform updates. And so carers were required to guide them through the updated features, which could be difficult and it could be frustrating as well at times for both the person with dementia and the carer. So secondly, carers really valued social media for people with dementia. They felt that supporting this use of social media was part of their caring role. It was part of their caring role as someone who facilitates social connections and cognitive stimulations. So by helping the person they cared for to maintain existing social connections, particularly with family members, they saw themselves as improving their emotional well-being. And also carers felt a sense of responsibility for keeping the person with dementia connected to their local communities. And so they use social media to support this need. So Facebook community groups like village Facebook groups, for example, And they provided a really important way of accessing local information. And this created a sense of belonging for the person with dementia within their local communities, and it helped combat some of the isolation. They also recognise the importance of keeping people with dementia mentally engaged, cognitively stimulated, and also use social media to support that. And this included activities like, social interaction on social media, but also following hobbies and interests and staying informed on current events. And again, we saw that some carers were using social media to support reminiscence here as well. So they used photographs which were on social media to trigger memories, to encourage positive conversations, and therefore encourage positive emotions as well that came from that. And while carers, as I did say earlier, while they recognise the benefits of social media, they also recognise their vulnerability within these spaces. So a lot of carers were concerned that the person they cared for would unintentionally disclose personal information on social media, such as financial details, or they might click on a malicious link that could cause them to be a victim of fraud. And carers were also really concerned about scammers as well, and kind of the emotional tactics that they use. And scammers are quite savvy as well nowadays. Another concern was that the person they cared for would inadvertently be exposed to misinformation or fake news. And they were worried of how the person with dementia would critically evaluate this content. And they were concerned that this might increase their vulnerability and it could influence their future decision making. So what carers did was they implemented various strategies to overcome this. So they would sometimes help to manage the social media profile of the person with dementia, such as authorizing follower or friend requests, implementing strict privacy settings. They might check the messages and notifications of the person with dementia. They might restrict access where they're unavailable as well. And this was a real difficult balancing act for some of the people we spoke to. They wanted to protect the person, but they also wanted to respect them as well and respect their autonomy and their right to make decisions within online spaces. So they didn't want to exercise too much control. And what some carers actually did was they called for social media companies to take greater responsibility here. So they called for innovations in the way these sites are developed and designed to protect their users. So some suggested that versions of platforms, and there could be specific privacy controls that could be in place for people with dementia, similar to existing controls that we're seeing for young people. And finally, so supporting social media usage, it was labour intensive for carers. It did involve considerable time and considerable energy. And this did become more intensive as dementia progressed. So this level of support, it seemed to follow a clear trajectory. Initially, carers helped the person they cared for to create social media profiles, provided occasional technical support. But over time, this level of support did increase to providing regular reminders or spending an increasing amount of time and effort supporting social media usage. And some carers actually took control of the social media profiles and would create posts and respond to messages on the person's behalf. And this did take a little bit of a toll on both the person with dementia and the carer. So the person with dementia might become confused, frustrated, or upset. Whereas the carer, sometimes it would require some patience, and they might also feel frustrated as well. And actually having to do this, in addition to the other work they were doing, it could sometimes become quite difficult for them. So what does this all mean? Well, it's clear that some carers are regularly helping people with dementia to navigate these really complex spaces of social media by providing ongoing technical support and guidance. And importantly, what my work is it sits within this broader landscape where we're seeing an increasing digitalization of dementia care. And there is this reality that there's going to be a continued growth of social media usage among an aging population, which does mean that carers, organisations, policymakers, and tech developers, they need to prepare for the increasingly prevalent role that digital technologies such as social media will play in dementia care. So in particular, they need to work together to find strategies for harnessing the benefits of social media while also addressing the associated challenges and ultimately enhancing quality of dementia care. And however, I do just want to make this really clear. Technologies, they're not this one-size-fits-all solution, right? And that includes social media. The carers in our study experience clear challenges, but also social media, it might not be appropriate for all people with dementia. It might not be of interest to all people with dementia, and that's okay. But what is essential is that the people who are interested in these spaces are able to access them and are able to use them. So it's important they're accessible and inclusive so that a wider range of people can benefit should they wish to do so. And also our work, it comes at this time where there's a lot of critical debates going on in the UK about the online safety bill. And this bill intends to make social media companies more responsible for their users' safety. And what we've seen is a lot of discussions around young people, but discussions around dementia have been limited in this space. So what we need to do is we really need to raise awareness that actually this is an increasing proportion of people with dementia are going to be using social media. And so companies need to proactively identify and implement solutions that uphold the safety and the well-being of people with dementia. And also a substantial proportion we spoke to, they did want training, they did want educational resources. So future efforts could focus on tailoring existing educational initiatives or working with people with dementia to develop these. I guess just to finish up with what I'm doing next. So I'm very aware that a lot of the work I've done is focused on people who are already using social media. Now I want to learn from people who have either never used it or have stopped using social media, so we can identify barriers to engagement. I've done a lot of qualitative work, so I love speaking to people. Now looking to explore those relationships with some statistics to see, well, is this associated with measures of well-being? And also who is more likely to engage with social media and therefore benefit from it? And I'm also in the process now of co-designing some social media training and resources for people affected by dementia. So if you are interested in taking part, please do let me know. And also thinking about ways that we can develop social media platforms to be more accessible and more inclusive. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Shall I stop sharing my screen, Emma?
That would be perfect. Thanks, Catherine. Oh, that was really interesting. Thank you. Like, as I was listening, I summed up a little bit of what you were saying in that it feels like there's an optimum time to benefit from social media, and almost innovation then needs to take over a bit to lengthen that time frame.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think it's particularly valuable immediately after diagnosis as well in terms of access and support. People might not feel comfortable going to in-person support groups at that stage. Again, a lot to do with the stigma around it, or offline groups might not be appropriate for them. So actually going onto online forums, for example, might be really useful for them. But as we can see, as dementia progresses, then it can be more difficult to actually engage with these online spaces. And so that's what we need to focus on as well, is making it more accessible and inclusive. But also, as we know, not everyone has access to the internet. Not everyone has access to digital technologies to be able to go online. And not everyone does have the skills. So that's also what we're hoping to do, is to create some educational resources to support usage.
Well, that sounds really exciting. If you have any questions for Catherine, please drop them in the Q&A now and we will pick them up. Another thought I had as I was listening, I was thinking about social media, and I was thinking about it almost creating a bit of equality in the voices that we hear. So I think about Twitter and think about, we have professionals on there, sort of like practitioners, we have researchers, and we have people with lived experience, and it feels like there's sort of an equality in what in what people are able to share in their life experiences. And I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, it kind of levels the playing field almost. Myself and a colleague have sometimes described it as a soapbox where people can stand up and they can have their voices heard. And we have seen from social media really can have an impact as well on policy making. So if you think of from cancer research, for example, hashtag hello, my name is, that then led to this massive change within healthcare policy and practice as well, where healthcare practitioners have to go in, introduce themselves to the person. So yeah, it does very much level the playing field. And also a lot of people I've spoken to have said that they wouldn't know about a lot of opportunities if they weren't on social media, whether that be going to conferences, getting involved in research as well, so their voices are heard then, getting involved in groups as well, for example, advocacy groups. So it really is also the springboard to having your voice heard in offline situations too.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I was thinking, so recently, I suppose in the last 3 or 4 months, we've had two big stories that have hit social. One has been around the Alzheimer's Society advert, and we had a massive sort of sharing out on social media. We had films, we had blogs, we had letters, we had tweets. It was on Facebook, it was on LinkedIn, it was on Twitter. People were sharing, that they didn't approve of it or they did approve of it. And I just thought that's really interesting to see this sort of empowerment. Before, if something had come out, what would we do? We'd go and, I don't know, we'd tell our local councillor. But, because of social media, we were like, you had the likes of, you had people say no, and they, recorded a video about it. No, I'm not happy about this for these reasons. And I just wondered if you, and I suppose that's one example. And the other one was sadly when Wendy Mitchell died, we had this other, massive sort of outpouring across social media. And it really makes me as a practitioner feel like I'm part of this wider community. And that there is this level playing field of, for sharing opinions and sharing thoughts and whatever. I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you in that it's much more kind of accessible in some ways to get your opinion out there and to be heard. Because like you say, it's not like you have to go post off a letter now or something or whatever you would do beforehand. So that is helpful. And I think what you've just said as being a practitioner as well, what I find being a researcher and being active on Twitter is learning so much from people's experiences. So when people are tweeting about their experiences of dementia, I really do pay attention and I do listen and I learn from that. And I learn so much from Twitter and blogs of how people share their stories. And it's just a great way of me to be able to access that community as well and to access lots of different diverse voices too. So even when we were doing the online forum study, reading so many people's different stories, it kind of just brought dementia to life almost. And I could just really, yeah, as I say, access lots of diverse perspectives and learn from them and hopefully go on to improve in future based on that.
Definitely. I send out a weekly newsletter, and I start my research by going onto Twitter and putting dementia in, and then I'll be picking up people's blogs and sharing those because I think it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Richard said, excellent stuff. Thank you, Catherine. This may be more a question for your upcoming work, but have you been able to tease apart opinions, experiences, access issues from people with rarer dementias that are language or vision or behaviour led?
Ooh, okay, that's really interesting. So we haven't looked at it specifically, but it has come through a little bit in some of the analyses that we have done. So a lot of my work has more focused on young onset dementia. And for them, that's they're because of their age, they're typically a bit more tech savvy, able to engage. But in terms of the vision issues, there have been some difficulties with being able to read things on a screen potentially. This isn't necessarily social media, but when doing Zoom calls, some people reported really struggling to actually, first of all, recognize the person on a screen, but also being able to differentiate between certain things on the screen. And this could give them a bit of a headache actually as well. It's quite difficult. In terms of language, what we're finding is that, so it depends what you mean in terms of language. So if you're thinking about language in terms of typing and expressing yourself in that way, some people did find that to become a lot more difficult over time. So they've actually spoken to me about using dictation to still make sense of social media. So to be able to type out a post when, well, they can't type, but they'll speak it, and they'll still be able to access it that way. Or they'll use the software where it reads the screen for you as well. So if they're having problems reading or something like that, they can use that software and it'll then read what's available on the screen to them. But yeah, very interested to explore that a little bit more. So Richard, if you want to make contact, feel free to send me an email.
Oh, look at the Talbots hooking up
I
on
know,
the webinar.
the Talbots.
I wondered, we talked about dementia doubters and you talked about stigma. So obviously most of the talk has been about the more positives of social media, but there is that negative, and I've seen it impact on some of our people living with dementia who post regularly. Some people came off social media for a while because it had such an impact on them. Thankfully they've come back, so that's good for us all. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, or what protection that could be offered, or
Yeah, I think it's challenging. So the people I've spoke to have received this abuse from kind of two different groups of people. Sometimes it is from, say, carers who are caring for someone who is in the later stage of dementia. And so that's perhaps their view of dementia. And with that, I think it's a bit more difficult. But with professionals who are going on and are sending these messages to people with dementia, that there needs to be some professional guidelines around this, in my opinion, because it's not really acceptable. But also some other things I guess we could look at is automatic detection with language as well. That's been used in a lot of other spaces, although it's not the best, to be honest with you. But in the meantime, I think what we need to do is, like with my educational resources that we're developing, is to think about how can we make people with dementia aware that this is potentially a risk, this might happen, and this is how best to handle that if it does happen to you, whether that be just blocking or reporting or whatever is best for you in that case. So yeah, it is a tricky one.
It is. Richard just came back to say great ideas.
Thanks,
That's just the
Richard.
Talbots again,
No.
chatting. What else did I have to ask about? There was one other point. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting about how people use Facebook and the memories, because it is anyone who works in dementia, it doesn't take you much to think, as your memories are coming up on Facebook, you might be thinking, well, in the future this might be my form of reminiscence. It's just where our heads will be at, but it feels like it's really broadened out. So the fantastic work of dementia diaries and sharing people's experience and recording that, it feels like it's broadened it out to a much wider group of people who are using it in lots of different ways, and really varied and innovative ways, to share stories, to challenge stigma, to share experiences, and just to really sort of bring on people's learning and understanding around dementia.
Yeah, and I do think what I'm always so impressed by and get loads of ideas from the people I speak to is how innovative and creative people with dementia are with technology. And ultimately, what I found in my research is they'll adapt technology to meet their needs, and they'll find, if they want to use the technology, they'll find quite creative ways of actually using that. And yeah, so it's really fantastic. And finding these new ways to challenge stigmas around dementia and challenge stereotypes, and to ultimately raise awareness, which is just fantastic. And I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
Thanks, Catherine. Richard's come back. Interesting, RE doubters. How much are the aspects of social media use? Sorry, how much are the aspects of social media use people with dementia talk about connection, wider groups, maintaining interest, being trolled, correlated with what people without dementia say about social media use? Okay, so that comparison. So
that is very interesting. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. You've kind of stumped me there. I think that, so what we're doing at the moment is we are looking at these correlational stuff to see, well, how does social media, who's using it? And we have got some cognitive measures in there as well, and activities of daily living measures as well. Haven't done the analysis yet, so can't tell you about that yet. So that is something to think about and pick up, actually. Fantastic. Thanks, Richard.
Any more questions? We're in our last couple of minutes now, so if you have any more questions, please pop them in. I just launched the poll a second ago, so please share your thoughts on today's talk. If you have any other questions, pop them on. I mean, you know, we talked about Facebook, and just, it feels, of all the platforms, Facebook feels like the one where people get where people are most vulnerable in terms of scams. You know, Facebook Marketplace, like people I know without dementia, who are not, you know, who are quite young, have been scammed by Facebook. So it does feel like quite a vulnerable space in comparison to other social media platforms.
Yeah, it definitely. And I know a lot of people who have been scammed on it as well. So it's very easy to, I don't know, click on something that's almost too good to be true and give away your bank details, and then that money is gone. Also with Facebook Marketplace as well, and having protections of, do you know who this person is? Not giving them your address as well, for example. It is very tricky, and scammers, as I said earlier, they're becoming smarter. So they're able to scan people's Facebook pages and stuff. So if you're a member of a dementia group, they might be able to identify that and see that you're potentially a person who's vulnerable, so could target you in that way. So it's just about being aware, stepping back and thinking, is this too good to be true? And kind of, yeah, and going from there. But social media companies also have responsibility here as well.
They do, Catherine. And that pair of socks that I bought that was too good to be true off Facebook. I did get the socks, but they weren't from the authentic company that I thought I ordered them from. But it's so easy, isn't it? And it's just like, well, that pod that was going to be enormous, but actually turned out to be really small. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. Richard said, in clinic, we've had some horror stories of people with FTD. Sorry, it's just popped off.
Yeah, not always online.
Sorry, being scammed, not necessarily online. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's a vulnerable space for people, and I think that training that you're talking about, Catherine, will be really positive for people. You know, like, how can we use it safely, and what protection can we have so that we can, you know, get the benefits out of social media, and support people with dementia to use it. Jackie has said, excellent webinar. I'll be in touch, Catherine.
Thank you, Jackie.
It really was such an interesting webinar, Catherine. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your research. Let's carry on talking. For anyone who's interested, our next conversation is on the 22nd of May, and it is with Professor Christina Victor, who will be taking a life course approach to understanding loneliness in later life. So that's our next webinar. Thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you have a lovely Wednesday afternoon, and take care.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye, everyone.